Let's move right on to our first afternoon session, dealing with designing the global metropolis, how design and creativity will shape the 21st century city. Should be a very stimulating discussion after lunch. I'll ask the panel, keep it lively. So let's meet our panelists, shall we? From Manchester, England, Sir Richard Leese. Sir Richard is the leader of the council that's the mayor of the city of Manchester. Also on our panel, from Lord Cultural Resources, its principal, Joy Bailey Bryant. From global architectural firm Populous, Brad Clark. And from Vancouver, Canada, where City Age began, as a matter of fact, international art collector Bob Rennie, president of Rennie Marketing Systems and the North American chair of the Acquisitions Committee for the Tate Gallery. Our panel chair is the famous and wonderful Kathleen McGuigan, who is editor-in-chief of Architectural Record magazine and a friend and partner of us at the American Architectural Foundation. Panel, engage us and educate us.
Thank you, Ron, for that really nice introduction. I had to write him a very big check to say that. Welcome back, everyone. It's great to be here. Architectural Record is more than 100 years old. It's the premier magazine for architecture in the United States, and it has always been focused very much on individual architectural projects. But in the last couple of years, we have been focusing increasingly on architecture's role in the larger city and urban design. We really think that the city is, given this conference and others and other people writing about this, is the center stage of thinking about building and development in the 21st century. So this panel we were charged with is a very broad topic, design and the role of culture in creating the 21st century city, but we certainly know that creativity and culture are vital to economies of 21st century cities. The mayor of New York and his administration certainly understand that and have fostered that. The creative class that Richard Florida coined wants to live in a certain kind of creative city, well-designed city. We're going to consider culture very broadly in this discussion, but I wanted to start with the mayor of Manchester, England, who's come a long way. It turns out he has a favorite soccer team, or football as they call it. I named the wrong one, and I got really backstage. I got a big frown from him, so be careful about which team you cite. But Richard Leese has overseen an incredible revitalization of a city that, as he put it, had a 70-year decline from being, the great manufacturing textile center of Great Britain in the 19th century until he inherited the city in the mid-90s, and it's had a really radical transformation. Richard was telling me that when MoMA reopened in 2004, they had an exhibition of master plans, and they included in the exhibition a new master plan for Manchester. And he said the thing that distinguished Manchester's master plan from the others in the exhibition was that their plan had actually gotten built. So I'd like Richard to tell us a little bit about some of the initiatives and priorities for Manchester in thinking how to revitalize itself into the city we know today, and a city that is continuing to grow and attract more and more attention.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm actually on vacation in New York at the moment, so the organisers got me cheap, which is why I'm here. Just a little bit of context, and really, Manchester has a lot to answer for in many respects. It was the city where in the late 18th and early 19th century, science and business met and changed the world. And it was not only in the mid-19th century the preeminent industrial city in the UK, it was a preeminent industrial city in the world. The world price of cotton was set by mill owners on one street in the heart of the Ancoats area of Manchester. Those old industries went, those mass production industries, textiles, chemicals, engineering, and you can trace the decline of those industries in Manchester from the mid-1920s all the way through to early 1980s when the last remnants disappeared. There's something like 2/3 of the jobs in industrial East Manchester went in 4 or 5 years in the early 1980s. Contrast that with now and the change. Between 2001 and 2011, after that 70 years of population decline, population of the city of Manchester grew by 19% in that 10-year period. It was the fastest growing city in the UK. Another figure change that's also that now that Manchester is, in terms of international visitors, is the 3rd most visited city in the UK. London 1, Edinburgh 2, Manchester 3. These are signs of a transformation that's taken place. The ingredients within that transformation, as you would expect, are manyfold, but related to this, there are 2 aspects of it. One is certainly the importance of culture. And this is about, if you're going to grow a city, if you're going to make a place, why would anybody want to live there? Why would anybody want to have a business there, bring a family up there? So part of this is a role of culture and indeed design in placemaking. And the other aspect of that is design and the sort of design principles we used. We first learnt about that. I'm not going to go into any detail. Actually, in a residential neighbourhood just to the south of the city centre. It's a residential neighbourhood that was subject to slum clearance starting from the 1930s right through to the 1960s, rebuilt in the 1960s, and won lots and lots of prizes. And what we did was to rebuild a new slum. And we had to start again to clear it again and use principles to make sure that didn't happen again. It's not happening again. It is probably the most successful large-scale urban regeneration project anywhere in the UK, which is the suburb of Hume. But there were principles learnt there about mixed use, about the physical relationships you need in space at that sort of scale that we've used ever since, including in the revitalisation of the city centre, the downtown area. 20 years ago, this is a relatively compact downtown area. Virtually nobody lived there. It's less than 500 people lived in the downtown area. Again, a symptom of success. There are now over 20,000 people live in the downtown area. And the reason it's only 20,000 people is that unless we build new residential buildings, we can't have any more. The downtown area is now full. And that's a key element of that transformation, of making the downtown area not only a place for commerce, not only a place for fun, but also a place that people live. Something very familiar in a city like New York, but something that has certainly been lost from the industrial cities, the old industrial cities of the UK, but something we were the first to reintroduce, very successfully reintroduced, and in many respects at a very much smaller scale. Just like New York, we are a city that never sleeps.
Thank you, Richard. That's really interesting. I'm going to jump around a bit and ask Bob Rennie to tell us a little bit about a project that he has been deeply involved in Vancouver. Bob is an art collector and has a museum, and he is of his work, but he's also very involved in consulting with the city about development and how you successfully help them use culture in a housing project that you were describing to me in what is the poorest postal code in Canada, in a part of downtown Vancouver.
So maybe to preface and put Vancouver in context, Vancouver is the 8th largest city in Canada. We pretend to be the 3rd largest city in Canada because we always talk about the metropolitan region, but we're a small city of 603,000 people. The province of British Columbia, only 4.9% of the population earns over $100,000, and 65% of our population earns less than $50,000. So my comments always come from, unfortunately, knowing that knowledge. So in the downtown east side of Vancouver would be equal to America having a Macy's closed for 20 years. the city of Vancouver was looking at redevelopment, and I have a philosophy that, we all talk at 30,000 feet, but that's not where we meet. We meet on the ground, and I believe that I can move the less fortunate in with the fortunate, as long as there's housing stock zoned and legislated in place in perpetuity for the less fortunate. And then I can move a conscious fortunate population in with them. We can't move the less fortunate in with the fortunate. It is so disruptive. And to move, if you take your highest end building in New York, you can't move the less fortunate. Their needs in the elevator are completely different. But we do all meet at the ground plane. So we did 536 market condominiums, 200 non-market units that have a rent that's meets your social assistance welfare of $375 a month. But we needed a catalyst. And we put Simon Fraser University's Performing Arts Center in. And what happened through the process is Simon Fraser wasn't able to raise its $50 million that was required for them to make the move. And I went to the government, and I felt that we were going to kill the downtown east side of Vancouver forever if we didn't save Simon Fraser University. And the Minister of Finance and the Minister of Housing, we got together and we gave them $39 million. And I feel that we copied NYU. Well, nobody has NYU, but by putting education at the ground plane, students have the highest tolerance for diversity because they're broke too. So it's a very good mix. But what's happened is, if you go, I'll jump over to Chicago. There's an artist, Theaster Gates. Met with Theaster for the day. You go into a very poor area of Chicago, and he's formed the Johnson Library from the Johnson Estate. The owners of Ebony Magazine have funded it, a Center for Black Film Studies. And I said to Theaster, and then he takes parts of the homes and makes amazing art, which we have in the collection placed in the Tates. But I said to Theaster, I said, the neighborhood must hate you. And he said, what are you talking about? And I said, they must want to kill you because they'll see it as gentrification rather than change. And he said, no, they love me because we're actually giving identity, and they're participating with the mayors and councillors are coming down in Vancouver to try and cause that change. The 200 on social assistance that have moved in to the Woodwards building are hated by the advocates in the community because they just see it as gentrification. We're a very passive-aggressive city, and it's really hard to move it along. So there's still picketing restaurants that open in the area. They broke my windows. We have a Martin Creed, maybe you do in your museum in Manchester, but Martin Creed is a British artist and it's 75 feet of neon that says everything's going to be all right, and they take it as a personal attack. Mm-hmm. But we're determined to just work through it, but you wouldn't think that Canada has these social problems because we have a wonderful mask on us. But so 2 blocks away in Canada's poorest postal code, we took the oldest building in Vancouver's Chinatown, and not being Asian, the family let it go. There was over 300 descendants in the family, and it's a cultural observation, but nobody wanted to see anybody in the family have the burden of restoration, and nobody wanted to see anybody in the family have the windfall of restoration. And it involves all cultures. But Vancouver, as we're moving along, Joy and I have bantered in the media over a Starchitecture museum coming that's going to cost $500 million, and I lean towards more of the public-private solutions because we don't have the philanthropy there. They're running off to the government, and the feds, Mr. Katz said very eloquently, is the feds have left the building, and they have in Canada, and they left a long time ago. So we have to find ways for private citizens to really get involved, and we don't quite have the American model figured out yet. But we're working through it. But we put in an arts and cultural solution to Chinatown, thinking it was a polite bridge as to see the street change, but all of my neighbors are just waiting for the government to step up and change it. So it's a slower process there because we're very anti-gentrification, which I just see as change.
That's a fascinating story, and thank you for giving it to us in all its complexity. It's really, really interesting, and I want to get back to it after we let our other 2 panelists speak. It's very interesting. Joy, you and I were talking, and I was so interested, and I think it's an important point to make, that change can happen at all different scales. And good design, bringing the arts. Joy is doing work with, is a arts consultant. You can describe a little bit better what you do,
right.
but is working in Chicago, and she was telling me that the new mayor of Chicago, Rahm Emanuel, who everybody should remember was a dance major at Sarah Lawrence College. He doesn't put that at the top of his resume, but that's his political background, was saying to Joy, well, I mean, we're going to pave the streets anyway. We have a budget. We're going to repaint the white stripe down the middle of the street. Does it have to be white? What if an artist did it? What if it was purple? And Joy kind of enters cities as a consultant on a lot of different levels of using the arts to help regenerate neighborhoods.
Right, so we talk a lot about planning cities culturally so that we can use these small levels of intervention, incremental changes within neighborhoods to achieve city goals. So in that case, the mayor was speaking about the fact that public safety goal was for people to drive slower, to notice the crosswalks better. So what are the best ways that you can actually make people pay attention, slow down? And we see this because surely if you have a crosswalk and an artist is engaged to design that crosswalk, it's going to make you slow down and notice. You're going to look at it. You're going to look at the different elements of it. One of the things that was really interesting in the talk just before lunch, when Biarke was talking about the reminder rings of the space that they designed it was an educational, there was still a need, the CO2 was still coming out of the smokestacks. The smokestacks were still going to be designed. So what is the opportunity there to educate the public about what's really going on in this space? So the intervention of a cultural agent, an artist, and working together, you then are able to achieve a goal of that particular developer, and the city, which is further education of the public. We do that across the board with different cities. We've done this in Chicago, and when you were talking about Theaster Gates, we've worked with his work, and one of the things that's very telling and very important in doing a lot of this community work is that it is very much that bottom-up type of planning. So that rather than maybe taking the I'll go ahead and say maybe what's happened in Bilbao years ago when the Guggenheim came and landed on the city. And the city has this boon where many tourists come into the environment but are not necessarily interacting with the rest of the city. It was not necessarily the decision of the people living in the city. So as a way of cultural planning, and we've worked in Bilbao, we went in and worked with the different neighborhoods, the different cultural organizations to understand their needs and to see what the city and the corporations in that area were saying were really important to them. And how can we work with this great draw and make it more a part of the city? So that's a big goal, because one of the things that the city was not realizing, and I say the city as in the government, the mayor and council, they were not seeing the financial benefits really of this great tourist mecca. So this planning cities culturally, this idea that we're working across cultural groups and boundaries and communities to utilize the arts and artist organizations to achieve our big goals of transportation, better public safety, better education. That's really what we're all about, and what Theaster has been very successful at doing with his Dorchester projects. So I'd love to talk a little bit more about that as we move forward, but that's
good. Thank you, thank you. And now I want to ask Brad to speak a little bit about, Brad is an architect with Populous, and Populous is the foremost architect of sports facilities in the United States and elsewhere. It's been an interesting thing. There was a period of time, as you know, in which building a sports stadium was going to be the great antidote for America's urban problems, and many, many mayors raised the money and built a stadium. Sometimes they're very successful, sometimes they're not. Sometimes they're sort of a black hole on a city surrounded by parking. Sometimes they're very well integrated and become the kind of economic draw that the city leaders hope they will be. Can you talk a little bit about how the design of sports facilities has changed, how you advise developers and city governments who come to you, and what you think some of the great examples are of good arenas and stadiums and why they work?
Sure. With such a specific focus, it's an interesting pursuit to try to figure out how these buildings, these sports facilities, arenas, stadiums, and other venues, convention centers even, are really an important part of the city fabric. We really see them as part of the culture of a place, and the history of sports design has gone through a number of iterations, from venues built in the early part of the 19th, 20th century that were civic edifices, highly designed, super important civic buildings. And then there was a period in the 60s and 70s when, as you said, a lot of these venues were being built outside of city centers, suburban parking lots essentially, surrounded by parking, and not really contributing in the best way possible that they could to their communities. So then from that, there was a transition, or almost a rebellion, beginning probably in the early to mid 80s, to bring venues back downtown. Certainly they don't all get built there, but seeing that there was a value to putting a cultural place, a place where people come together, a community living room, if you will, as a part of a center city. And I think there are some good examples of that, and there probably are a lot that aren't as successful.
Some of the good ones.
Well, I would say one of the really good ones that's been built fairly recently would be the ballpark Target Field in Minneapolis. You know, this is one of my colleagues in the audience actually was a big part of that project. Super tight urban site. It sits right on top of transportation, rail center, rail hub. It's really brought people downtown in that city and enlivened it in a way. Because with a ballpark as opposed to a football stadium, you're talking at least 80 some events a year, 81 games, sorry, half of a season. And you know, that's where say a football stadium is not as successful. 10 or 11 events, maybe a concert or two. So if you look at a ballpark like Target Field, or a indoor arena, say the Amway Center in Orlando, which again, as a venue that is used a lot, 150 to 250 times a year, those venues bring real people downtown, and they bring people that spend dollars, and they add vitality to the streets, and really are contributors. So there's been a real transformation, I think, but you know, I think we see it headed in the right direction.
Can I make a comment on use of sporting venues? It's something we have done really at scale in Manchester. I'm going to Target Field a week Saturday, so I'm looking forward to even more than I was as a Twins fan anyway. As well as a soccer stadium, it's Manchester City Football Club's soccer stadium, who are, I think, recolonising a little bit of New York, because they've got a joint venture with the New York Yankees to start a new soccer franchise here in a couple of years. But as well as the soccer stadium, we have an athletics arena, a velodrome, a BMX centre, a tennis centre, a squash centre. There are a whole range of sporting facilities there. They're used for events the year round. For sport themselves, it's everything from schools using them on a daily basis right through to elite athletes training there. And this is neither city centre or out of town. This is an old industrial inner city area. By using this array of sports facilities, we've been able to give a real new focus to that area. And these sports facilities were built on a former colliery, a former steelworks, a former power station, a former gas works. It is that sort of industrial landscape that has been transformed and brought jobs and brought new uses to that area, and made it actually an area that people there can feel proud of as well. And in terms of placemaking, how people feel about their neighbourhoods is often underlooked a lot, and how if people feel good about their neighbourhood will be good, and that's a really important ingredient of how we build cities.
Can I?
Yeah.
One of the things that we did, we've done actually quite a few times in different cities, and it worked particularly well in Chicago, was that we asked people, what do you love about your neighborhood? And what we were doing was a cultural plan across the city. But it's very difficult to, without using a whole bunch of words, define what cultural planning will do. So what we asked, when we asked them this question of what do you love about your neighborhood, they could say anything. They could say neighbors, trees, draw a picture, it didn't matter. And we took a picture of them holding up their car that said that. And we plastered that in the pedways, in the public transportation system. It became the poster for the cultural plan to let people know that we're talking about you and your neighborhoods. This is about you. So that was kind of instilling that idea of what is that you have pride in about your neighborhood. And that was so telling. A lot of people had told us, and we've gotten a lot of comments about that one aspect as the piece that made them say, I have ownership over this.
I think that's one of the most interesting new aspects about design and planning is the community-based design, and we're seeing this in all kinds of, but it's still new. I mean, I don't know how deeply that was involved with Manchester, though it was very successful. It sounds like, Bob, you might talk a little bit more about what happened in Vancouver. I was really interested, I think we all were, in the fact that it's been a bit of a struggle. There's always this conflict between upgrading an area and people feeling squeezed out, and gentrification. I mean, it's a real issue, and it sounds like
what we've done. The downtown east side has very, very strong advocacy groups that are hanging on to yesterday. We'd all like September 2008 back, and it's gone. So it's very hard to. Street to Home is a foundation that's provided 1,500 housing units for the homeless in the last 5 years. We're getting people out into other neighborhoods. But the trouble is you get layers of government involved, and that you're building them to a hospital standard and building half the housing that you really wanted to build. But with the arts and cultural side, I'm in a public debate with the Vancouver Art Gallery that wants to build a very large architecture building. And my thing is, let's get it out into communities and see the coffee shops, the artists. You know, our thing is follow the artists and prostitutes, and I'll show you where any city is going to grow. That is the next area, because they have to be close to the most popular area in the city. But I think by having smaller bites, and especially Vancouver, we have no head offices. 3, we do, but no head offices to speak of, and we're not a financial center. So I worry about the philanthropy of getting the private sector involved. But it's the smaller bites, what Joy just says, working from the ground up. What the Astor's doing just fascinates me, is how he's taken arts and culture, and he's a smart man. He's capitalizing on the material that comes out of these forgotten houses, and making art that speaks an awful lot about racial content and social commentary. And those are the sort of solutions. In Vancouver, 400 people signed a petition for a large museum, and 22,000 signed a petition for an old, we call it the Waldorf Hotel, that was a place to meet on Friday nights, cheap beer, and a restaurant that everybody liked. 22,000, and it just points out more and more how we have to get out there with the community, and we have to listen to where they are in this economy and get them participating. But the trouble is, the politicians anywhere, if you just use British Columbia, they want the money from the 4.9%, but they want the votes of the 65%. And they're going to have to start to really pay attention to the 65%. Don't just give them lip service. And I also have a political view that 18 months before any election, the Teflon suit goes on. So we end up with sort of an 18-month to 1-year term with civic politicians. And it's very difficult to make decisions that upset neighborhoods, that cause some change when you might lose votes.
Yeah.
So, and I think Mr. Katz, he's my new idol, is that I'd written it down where he said that we're paralyzed with partisan policies. That they'd rather throw the baby with the bathwater than try and save the baby.
I don't think it's really important. It's really difficult. I'm in the city where we have council elections every year, so we don't even have.
So you have a 1 month term.
It is certainly working with communities is very, very important. But working with communities, you have to set the parameters. And the example I used earlier of Hume was that. There were some of the buildings there were based on the old Georgian crescents. Indeed, they were called crescents, but they were uninhabitable by families within 18 months of being opened. Now, there was a very articulate, largely ex-student population. They're very, very well organised, and they wanted to keep at least one of the crescents when we were rebuilding that area. And so, part of our parameters were the crescents had to go. This is partly of building an understanding of symbols in placemaking, and those crescents stood. They were a symbol of the Hume that needed to be got rid of, and we would never have changed the perception of the area whilst those particular buildings were standing. So there was a very real engagement with community, but it was on here. This is a baseline. This is what we're working on. In terms of electoral periods, is again, I think it's one of the things that we're quite clear on. We learnt in the early 90s was that if you've got 70 years of decline, you don't turn it around with a 2, 3, 4 year program. And we think very clearly now in 10 to 20 year programs about how we build places. What you have to do when you're building a place like that, though, you can't say to a community, hang on, it's going to be all right in 20 years' time. It has to be very incremental. Something has to be happening all the time. And as long as something is happening all the time, by and large, communities will go with you.
You could speak to that a little bit, Joy, I think. And the other sort of theme that's sort of emerging, I think, here that you might all address a little bit is the idea of mixed use. You certainly said, Richard, that was one of the reasons some of your low-income housing succeeded. You're not just putting just housing here. That's true of your project, Bob, and I think it's true of some of the successful sports arenas, and it's everything that you're doing is you're making small interventions. Could you all kind of speak about that a little bit?
Sure. We're working in a community right now in Baton Rouge, which is a historically African-American community that, same story across the country and across the world, has been disinvested and all these different types of things that are bad, but there are also the very good things of the community being very serious about the heritage of the city. And just to speak to Richard's point of this incremental need, there have been plans for the last 15 years, but there's not been any action on any of those. But just the simple acts of putting up, and I know people say this a lot of times, but this is actually how Theaster Gate started, which is the painting of large buildings, the big murals, the indication that actually things are happening on grand scales in places, because the painting of big murals means that we're actually paying attention to this area. And we're now planning, we're planning to we're actually working with the Housing Authority for the housing development. So, just like the little indications, this is happening, this is going to happen, the website development, and these are the small things, because you know that the big things are going to come and they're going to have to take that time. So it's a little bit of that, making sure that the public it's also very important when you're listening to the public to actually come back to them on a considered, constant basis. You're rechecking beyond, well, do you like what we've done so far? Making sure and having that website, having that, all of those opportunities to come back in. So that's small, not on the big housing, but it means that something is coming now, coming later.
Brad, could you talk a little bit about how some of these facilities can integrate into the community? I know the original plan for Barclays, and now we're going to see some housing, was for a mixed community that was going to keep it from being sort of a...
Yeah. I think we're getting there. I think Barclays is a unique situation, and this is a unique place, this city. I think we're getting there maybe somewhat incrementally. You know, we're activating the buildings at the ground level within our downtown cores. We're trying to make them places that have an active street presence when there isn't an event. I think we're closer to some models, maybe more so around the world than in the United States, that are more mixed use. We're looking at one project right now that would involve a convention center expansion connected to a new arena, connected to a new significant hotel, 500-key hotel. So those opportunities are out there, and I think they will be more likely to happen in the near future. But I don't think we're quite there yet here in the States.
Our Vancouver Canucks hockey team is building 3 residential towers attached to it right now, so that the ground plane will be very, very busy. In Vancouver, if you walk into the Four Seasons and you're the chair of the opera board, or you have a box at the Vancouver Canucks, the hero is the guy with the box at the Vancouver Canucks. we're in Canada. But with Chicago, Vancouver is 40% Asian. Greater Vancouver is 28% Asian. And I think no matter what community you go into, with the murals, like you're saying, Joy, the only way is you have to do something the community likes, and then they'll start to calm down and maybe address and start to understand what you think is best for them. But they don't want us just coming in and speaking for them. So you have to do it slowly to get the engagement. If you look at the Asian population in Vancouver, all of our cultural institutions should start to put on performances and include them, so nobody comes in losing face and with ignorance. This works with any group. And then once they say they're accepted, they will start to pay attention to what Western culture likes. And the same thing going, I think that's what the Astor's doing, is painting the buildings and the bank that he's going to do now, that we really want to participate in, that you just see how he's causing such change that we can't do in Vancouver all at once. It's a 30-year process in Vancouver he may do in 12.
It's fantastic. I'd like to take this opportunity to open up the panel to all of you, and if you have questions, either general questions for all of our panelists or specific questions you might like to address. Are you feeling shy after lunch? It's hard to see out there, isn't it? Yes, I don't know if, please, the lady at the front table, yes.
Is that working? Yeah. I'm Laura Heery, and I'm on the Board of Congress for the New Urbanism. And there's so many topics embedded. Our initiatives include around transportation, infrastructure, finance, and resilient communities. And I'm curious, in Manchester, as you layer various strategies on place-based objectives, are you layering resilience in the sense of energy, water, food, waste?
That's to use.
That's very well. The short answer is yes, and we have a climate change strategy for the city and for the metropolitan area that are aimed at a 48% reduction in emissions by 2020. We have both a mitigation and an adaptation strategy, and that does mean building into our planning how we retain surface water, how we provide canopy, how we provide more shade, how we, in terms of energy and water and waste, how we more closed closed systems. I was reading today that Mayor Bloomberg is about to start collecting compostable material. That's something we've been doing for several years in order to reduce what goes to land waste. We're around about 38 to 40% recycling at the moment. We would expect to get to over 60% in the next 5 years. So yeah, that environmental sustainability and resilience is very much part of our short-term planning, actually, because we often talk about emission targets for 2050, but by and large, if we don't achieve the bulk of that in the next 5 years, we're going to be facing 4% warming rather than 2% warming. It is very much at the front of our minds.
Thank you. Other questions for?
Hi, my name's Kara Lindstrom. I'm from Drexel down in Philadelphia. Question about how you see the opportunities, perhaps, of culture in transportation. What I mean is, obviously we talk about mixed development, the impact of transportation infrastructure and the vitality of cities, but often that infrastructure is treated as hallway, pass-through. Do you see, in your experience, any opportunities for that hallway type mentality to be transformed, to be a cultural space, a civic space, an informational space, in terms of what are happening in sports venues, communicating and educating the populace, transforming, documenting what's happening, those little integral pieces that we're talking about, just from that sort of opportunity that is presented through transportation facilities.
Do you want to take
that? Yeah, sure. Well, I told you about the example of the very small example of the streetscapes, but Chicago has this, the Chicago Parks District has this planning for people concept, and in which they are redesigning their parks so that they are more usable spaces, they are more culturally incorporating culture into more of their opportunities for sports, for recreation, so that there is more education enfolded on top. So they're using artists, arts organizations to really convey more of a neighborhood story within the parks. They're also working with designers, landscape designers, to really communicate better to the neighborhoods, great uses for these parks, create better spaces, because a lot of the feedback that they've gotten from the neighborhoods is that these parks are not really usable. They're wide open spaces that they're not having an opportunity to incorporate with. So that kind of is one piece on creating better parks and better places for people. As far as transportation on the end of streets and design, what we're seeing in a lot of different cities is that there are just basic public safety needs that are not being met. And as I said, I gave you that one example, but by working with artists in the city of Amsterdam, for instance, I'm thrusting about for different examples because that's the best way I can show you what's happening. But in the city of Amsterdam, in every department, there is kind of a cultural liaison who is present, so that you can understand so that when the agencies are talking about what their needs are for creating better streets, creating better buildings to make people stop to notice, that there is an artist or a cultural liaison who's at the table, who's able and ready to access a lot of these cultural assets of the city, to bring them in so that they can say, okay, how might we solve this problem that has been identified by this department? So it's happening in different cities, but I'm thrusting about for a particular example, and I'll think of one and find you when I come to one.
Another there's somebody at the microphone. Oh, maybe we'll just go over here and then we'll come back to you. How's that?
Okay, thank you. I'm from Kansas City, Missouri, and I'm on the city council there, and some of the issues you mentioned seem very close to us as well. I just had a quick comment, I guess, about in Canada, where you said the people didn't want the fortunate moving in with the less fortunate. So that kind of reminded me of we have what we call Section 8 housing here in the U.S. And in our district, which is the central district, a lot of times they'll put the government or whatever, will put almost all the Section 8 seems to be in my district because it's a good district, but it has some challenges. So I was just wondering, is that what you meant? Like the people who are needing assistance, the people who already have made it to say are doing okay, and they don't want the people who are less fortunate, like Section 8 people, because a more mixed income neighborhood is a good thing a lot of times.
And I'm an advocate of diversity, and in the downtown east side, they've been testing a model where any new development has to have 20% non-market social housing.
Assistant, yeah.
And I'm championing to move that to 30%. If we go beyond 30%, you'll have a difficult time with the market side of it.
That's why I think mixed income is...
Yeah, and you have to tackle the problems that they can't be in the same building. You can't just take the bottom 8 floors and the top 20 floors, because unless they're separate elevators, because the needs and wants are completely different. One demographic's fighting for 24-hour concierge, and the other one's fighting for food stamps. And you have to make sure we can all meet at the ground plane, but we have to respect each other's current lifestyle. But 30%, I think, is an answer that works, but then we all get blamed for social engineering. But it's not 100% of any sector. That's not going to work anymore.
Richard would like to comment on that.
I'm quite happy to take blame for social engineering if it's about changing neighbourhoods to make them better places. And Manchester as a city was faced, particularly post Second World War, with a lot of rebuilding of very large monolithic estates that ultimately, they didn't start off this way, but ultimately they became, in American terms, welfare estates. Hume that I talked about was 99% city-owned social housing, and it meant to a large extent it couldn't support the amenities that you needed for a healthy neighbourhood. So part of the objective there was not to eliminate all of the social housing. Indeed, part of the rebuilding of Hume included a promise that everybody who lived there, who wanted to keep living in that area, could do so. There is an attempt to keep that community together. But the new Hume, which was a denser Hume, so there were more residential properties there, also brought in private rented properties. It brought in privately owned properties. A choice of tenures, a choice of buildings type. So you've got a far more mixed neighbourhood, and because it's a far more mixed neighbourhood, it's more sustainable. And that sort of figure that Bob just gave, we did some work on the social sustainability of neighbourhoods and worked out that once more than a third of a neighbourhood are benefit dependent, it's no longer sustainable.
But you also need services for the 30%.
Yeah.
You can't just say all the services are for the 70%. Yeah. So we're now moving it along that they have to provide non-market retail units, so that whether it's a laundromat or whether it's buying food a little bit less or a $3 sandwich, but having those services in for that community too, so they're not isolated.
Yeah. We have time for just one more question. I think it's this lady who's been waiting very patiently.
My name is Emma Stewart. I'm with Autodesk, the makers of AutoCAD and other design software. And Richard, I was interested in if you could take us behind the scenes a little bit in setting your greenhouse gas targets. The reason that we can anticipate a 2-degree rise is because of very sophisticated modeling, hydrologic, climatic, on the part of the IPCC and others. However, when we bring it down to the city level, we're often operating in spreadsheets or worse. I'm interested in how Manchester went about picking that target, and if you could shed some light on that topic.
Yeah, there is part of the University of Manchester, the Tyndall Institute, which have international expertise, reputation in environmental research, and basically we took what is the minimum of a national target for the UK, what is the minimum target that Manchester has to reach to contribute its fair share to tackling climate change. So that's where it came out of a piece of research done for us by the Tyndall Institute. So it's not an arbitrary figure, is that in terms of fair share, reduction in emissions, that's what Manchester has to contribute.
Thank you very much, and thank you to the wonderful panel, all of you. Pleasure, and thank you all for listening.
Thank you for sewing this together.
Thank you.